G'day guys, you got Ben and Simon here today at the Pumped On Property Show podcast. How you doing, man?
Yeah, good, very good, thank you.
So we're just recording this one. It's in between the Easter long weekend and Anzac Day. It's a bit of a different style podcast today just because it's going to be a bit more data heavy than others that we've done recently. We're effectively going to talk through what's happening over the next couple of months. So, what if Labor gets in? What if Liberal gets in? And what can we expect as investors or potential investors looking to get into the market? Before we sort of jump into that, man, what's been going on in your world?
So, yeah, just had the Easter long weekend. I feel so sorry for everybody that travelled up from other parts of Australia to get
just rained up here.
Nice weather on the Sunshine Coast. It was so bad. It's like the monsoon season. It's come a little bit late, but I was actually so grateful because the plants in the gardens needed a little bit of water, and it just kept me inside. Like when the sun's out, I'm always out and about doing different things, but I feel as though I just needed a bit of time to unwind and relax, and it was really nice, chill weekend. Hey, what about yourself?
That's sick. I've never heard anyone describe the rains on the sunny coast as like monsoon season.
It felt like that.
The rain's down in Africa.
It's like sunny one minute, absolutely howling wind and pissing down the neck. So it feels like Bali.
I'm building a house up here, as you guys know at the moment, like a dual income investment property. And I was at the site yesterday with my brother-in-law, Brad, who's helping me build it. And my daughter was walking around in this brand new pair of shoes that she just got and she's like, "Can I?" And I'm like, "Yeah, just do it." And she's just jumping in the mud, making an absolute mess out of herself. But half of the site was underwater to about ankle to knee depth. It's been crazy up here at the moment.
I can't believe how quickly they push those things along. I was there on Saturday with Brad, just dropping off a few things for you, and I was there less than 36 hours before, and there was just a big pile of dirt, pretty much. It was just a big flat block, and then I get there and they've completely boxed up the whole entire slab and put down the reinforcement. I was just like, gosh, these guys get it done.
Yeah, I spoke to the builder and he's literally put the slab down this morning, so that's done now as well. It's crazy because settlement was literally only a couple of weeks ago. It's been certified, and we'll have a roof on within sort of 3 weeks. It happens quite quick when you got the right team around you. But yeah, outside of that, just sort of heaps of hanging with the family. Like I told you yesterday, I started writing this book that I've been talking about for years. So the rough title at the moment is Becoming Financially Free, and it's going to go into a huge amount of the why behind it. It's going to go into quite a bit of exactly how you can do it, and then some strategies on exactly what's worked based on the history, and aligning people to where they could be in the future. It's just, I'm so excited, man. It feels like I'm doing my life's work doing that sort of stuff.
This is something that we've talked about for years now, you wanting to write this book, and it's so funny because I think I had a dream. I was telling you this yesterday about somebody asking me if Ben's ever going to write the book that he was talking about. And then literally yesterday in our weekly meeting, you said that you started working on it. I'm just like, that is insane. It's crazy how things like that work out. And we were just on the phone to a guy before who was talking about, what was he?
Yeah, it was a client that's just coming on at the moment called Ali, who's just an absolute legend. He's just had his first pub and he's looking to buy his second investment. And he was like, Simon, synchronicity is talking about
synchronicity, and it's so funny how things like that just consistently pop up all the time. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, what do they say? Be careful what you wish for; it might just come true.
Yeah,
it's like ideas and thoughts become your reality sometimes. And the feedback loop I've noticed, the more in flow I am with my own life, and I'm sure you guys listening to this or watching this feel the same way. When you're in alignment with your own life, it can be such an immediate feedback loop. Sometimes I'm like, sheesh, I'm more and more and more conscious these days of what I'm putting out there and my thoughts in my world, because the feedback loop is, quite direct sometimes as well.
Yeah, for sure.
It's exciting. So effectively, I just wanted to start today's, podcast with a huge disclaimer saying, I have no idea what's going to happen next. Like, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 12 months. I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 15 years. Like,
we don't know who's going to get elected.
We don't know who's going to get elected here. At the moment, it looks like Labor's slightly ahead at the polls, but I think it's going to be closer than they think. But I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Like, I don't know. I want it to be close. This isn't financial advice. This certainly isn't like everything's going to be good type of podcast, or everything's going to be bad either type of podcast. It's just, no one has a crystal ball. Take all of this with a complete grain of salt. Obviously, this is not relevant for your personal situation, but what I will say is that I am excited regardless of which political party gets in. I'm just extremely excited about the next 3 years as a result of it, and we'll talk about that particularly towards the end of this podcast. So again, like always, unfortunately I don't have many original thoughts. Most of the ideas that I have are the result of consuming heaps of content. Now, this is something that Adzi, or Adam, one of our business partners, sent to us, and it's effectively SQM's research. So SQM has put together this report, and we're just taking out their key findings today. If you want to check out the report, I think it was called the SQM A Look at Negative, what was it called?
Labor's Negative Gearing Policy, which you can find for free on their website. If you just type in SQM Research, it's probably going to be one of the top articles on their homepage, because it's quite a big one, and they've put a significant amount of thought and data into this report.
So what I love is they've looked at things as they are right now, but what I love is they've also gone back into history. So SQM is kind of like CoreLogic. Like, they're probably the second biggest analytics provider in Australia, and probably the second most reputable after CoreLogic. What they've done is they looked at what happened last time in Australia between 1985 and 1987 when negative gearing was scrapped. Now, the thing I love about this is it's not like we're going into uncharted territory. Like, we've seen what happened last time around, and history has a really funny way of repeating itself. So, this is just their thoughts on looking at that time plus overlaying current market conditions and forecasting over the next 3 years. So, what they've done effectively is they've talked about 3 different scenarios. Now, I'm going to walk through the data from those scenarios after. But effectively, scenario 1, they've said, is a cash rate cut, which effectively is reducing the interest rate, or the money that the Federal or the Reserve Bank of Australia lends money to the banks, by half of 1%. So that's a pretty big reduction. I don't know about you, but across my loans, I'd be stoked with a 0.5% reduction right now. They've also said that Labor will win the election. They've said that they will get rid of negative gearing, and they will change the law around capital gains tax. Now, we're not going to go into that today. You can easily Google this stuff if you want to have a look at it. These guys have put out this report, some really good articles on domain and realestate.com about this stuff if you want to know more. So, scenario 1 is effectively a drop in interest rates, Labor getting in, negative gearing getting scrapped.
Yep.
The second scenario is no change to interest rates, Labor getting in, negative gearing getting scrapped. And the third scenario is the interest rate dropping by half of 1% over the next 6 to 12 months, and effectively Liberal staying in.
No changes.
No changes to negative gearing. We forget that this conversation was even had, and we go back to whatever business as usual looks like over the next 5 years.
The cool thing is, any of these scenarios, the numbers excite me in one way or another.
Yeah, so, some of these numbers are going to scare you, some of them are going to excite you, depending on where you're at in your portfolio and which state or market you're in right now. But this is just SQM's thoughts on it. Again, I don't have an opinion and they don't have a crystal ball. So, let's look at scenario 1 from a capital growth as well as a cash flow perspective between now and 2022. So, we will include Perth because I know there's heaps of our clients over there that never get a shout out. Sorry guys, I don't mean to miss you, but it's just so many Aussies live in the East Coast. It's hard to remember to throw in stuff about Adelaide and Canberra and Perth.
We've got a slight bias to the East Coast, but
East Coast.
We'll include Perth for this one.
Cool. So I'll be Biggie and Simon can be Tupac in this one, and I'll be like East Coast and you're West.
Sweet, I get one, you get three.
In terms of Perth, based on scenario 1, we're looking at a +3 to +10% increase in the capital growth over there in the next 3 years, effectively between now and 2020. And then from a rent perspective, they've looked at Perth rents increasing by between +11 and +17% in the next 3 years. So even if Labor gets in, they're expecting capital growth and cash flow increases in Perth, which is kind of exciting. Should we do all 3 scenarios for each city, or should we go down scenario 1 for a few cities?
Let's go scenario 1. What's next on the list? Brisbane.
Brizzy.
So in scenario 1, over the next 3 years, what SQM is predicting is, from a capital growth perspective, there's a potential for Brisbane to lose up to 3% or gain up to 2% over that period of time in terms of capital growth. Now, when you look at the cash flow, when you look at the rent forecasts, Brisbane actually has the largest percentage increase, from 12 to 19% increase in rents over the next 3 years with scenario 1.
Yeah, so what's interesting is what happened last time Labor got rid of negative gearing is that all of the investors around Australia just went, well, cool, I'm just going to increase our rents. And rents went absolutely through the roof. In most areas of Australia, they went up by between 10 and 20% in 18 months. And then the Liberal government got back into power, because what happens is, like, property investors aren't silly. We're educated people, and a lot of investors are also business people that have big influence. And so, I'm running my property business as a business. It's not just, I'm just not investing for fun here and trading all this time away from my family for nothing. I'm running it to make money. And the second the marketplace gives me an opportunity to make more money, I'm going to take it.
Of course.
And every other investor around Australia is going to do that. And the problem with being someone that doesn't own property that's renting is that you've got no say. If rents increase in the cities or the regional markets of Australia that already have undersupplies, then there's nothing that they can do about that.
Which, is a little bit sad, because you look at why Labor are actually planning on doing this, and it's to make more affordable housing for Australians. And what's going to happen is these people that still can't afford to purchase their own home are going to have to pay rents through the roof if these changes come into place.
And that's if this happens, what I mean? Like, who knows if this is going to happen or not. This is just, it's what happened last time, and it's what's expected to happen this time. Now in Sydney, based on this first scenario of Labor getting in, negative gearing scrapped, and the interest rates being cut back, you're not going to like this, guys, in Sydney. We're talking about a -12 to -7% decrease in property values between now and 2022.
You might as well rip the Band-Aid off for Melbourne as well.
Yeah, well, in terms of Melbourne, it looks even worse, -13 to -8% between now and 2022. Now, it's not all bad, because in Melbourne, rents on the same scenario are expected to rise over this next 3 years by between 7 and 13%, and in Sydney by 3 and 8%. Now, the reason Sydney's lagging is because everyone knows, somehow we'll manage to create an oversupply of accommodation in Sydney with all of these off-the-plan units everywhere. So, Sydney's got about an extra 70 to 80,000 properties that have to be absorbed before the issues in Sydney disappear. The problem with that is people moving to Australia aren't choosing Sydney like they were, and Aussies are just getting the hell out of Sydney right now and moving to southeast Queensland. So it's just one of those things. Unfortunately, there's a bit of pain there in Sydney, but anyone that's been owning there for 5 to 6 years, you've got to remember that you're still 80% up from where you were at the end of all of this. Even if it drops by 20% from there, 100% gains minus 20%, you're still in a great position. So scenario 2 is effectively no change to the cash rate. Now, the reason why reducing the cash rate is important is because it makes property more affordable. It means that people can save more money, and hopefully re-stimulate the economy because they've got more money to spend. People go and, the average person, hopefully not you and I listening to this, but the average person goes out and sprays that extra cash rather than saving it or investing it. So it's a way to artificially stimulate the economy. It is a band-aid, it's not a long-term fix, but again, like if they're prepared to do that, I'm prepared to take the saving, and I'm sure you are listening to this as well. So no cash rate change in this scenario. Labor getting in, negative gearing getting scrapped. Now Perth in this scenario is -4 to +2%. Brizzy in this scenario is -7 to +1%. And Melbourne in this scenario, this is the worst for Melbourne, is a -16 to -8% drop in property prices in the next 3 years. Sydney under this scenario is -14 to -9% in the next 3 years. So, this is probably the worst case scenario. The government gets in. Property prices this year are already been expected and forecast for 2 or 3 years in Sydney and Melbourne to decline by between 6 and 10%. So most of the bleed is going to naturally occur anyway this year. But if Labor does get in and negative gearing goes and they don't do anything about monetary policy, then the bleed could last an extra 6 months to 12 months longer than expected. And we'll talk about that in the key findings later. Brizzy, on the other hand, I've already talked Brisbane, sorry, -7 to +1%. Now, if we look at scenario 2, so I just want to walk through cash flow because this is really exciting to me. As bad as it is if you've just bought in the last couple of years in Sydney or Melbourne and, you're going to have properties that are in negative equity for a period of time, just remember that the average annual gain in Sydney and Melbourne in the last 20 years has been 8% per annum. In the last 50 years, it's been 9.7%. In the last 50 years, we had a drop of property prices in Sydney in 18 months in 1988 to 1990 of 24%. This has happened before. As long as you're a long-term investor, this stuff shouldn't scare you. In fact, it should be the biggest buying opportunity that you could recognize in the current market probably in the last decade. So we will talk about that as well. But let's talk about cash flow because it's just insane.
Absolutely insane. So looking at Perth, it's expected to rise from 12 to up to 20%.
That's rents rising from 12 to 20% in literally just 3 years.
Unbelievable. It's huge. Brisbane is coming through at the front runner in terms of rents as well, with a +13 to +22% increase on rents, which, being exposed to the Brisbane market myself, that makes me really excited. If things do change a little bit, then at least I know that I'm going to be getting a little bit more cash flow. Melbourne's looking at a +9 to +15, so still extremely positive, and then Sydney coming behind at +3 to +10%. So we're seeing positive gains in all 4 of those areas with this scenario.
So, the general consensus between these scenarios from SQM is effectively if Labor gets in and cuts the cash rate, then, property prices will decline a little bit or sit flat in many parts of Australia and rent returns will increase in quite a significant way. Mm-hmm. If Labor does get in the second scenario and doesn't change the cash rate, then property prices will sit flat or decline in a pretty heavy way in some parts of Australia, Sydney and Melbourne in particular, but rents will increase in a significant way. Now, what's interesting about the third scenario to me is that this is based on, business as usual, Liberal getting in. Now, in terms of Perth, this is just insane. We are staring down the barrel right now of just, we're talking about 40% differences here.
Yeah.
It's just insane how much things could turn for the better or the worse in such a short period of time based on a tick of a pen, and the election, which is why I'm going to be personally voting Liberal. And I've been swinging between Labor and Liberal every election since I could start voting, but this time around I'm swinging Liberal just because I just don't want Australians to bleed in the way that they're going to bleed, particularly the renters. I've got no problem increasing my rents as a business person, but as someone who's rented and was literally living off $200 a week for 4 years at uni. Like, that pressure would have crushed me.
Yeah.
So this gets exciting now. Like, this is a relatively stable economy over the next 3 years, which everyone knows we're in the mid-cycle slowdown, guys. If your head's been in the sand for a while, we've been there for almost 6 months. I think if we look back with retrospective, we'll actually realise we've been in it for a year. Australian economy is pretty much in a recession right now. Like, they're artificially floating that we're not because there's an election coming up, but we are almost in 2 negative quarters of equity now in terms of GDP, which is a technical recession. Like, things are not bad, but they're not great either. And so we've just got to remember how much, as an election year, the government's been artificially pumping numbers. Now, this is based on Liberal coming in. It's a 9 to 17% increase in the values of properties over there between now and 2022. Which, you know, I suppose property prices dropped there by 25% in the last 7 years. It's been pretty tough in Perth for a while. In Brisbane, they're talking about +7 to +13%. In Melbourne, which is insane because I just mentioned in the last scenario -16 to -8% decline. In this scenario, we're talking about +8 to +14. And then in Sydney, in the last scenario, it was -14 to -9. In this scenario, we're talking about +8% to +14% growth in the next few years. So, effectively, what this is saying to me is no one knows what the fuck's going to happen here. And we're just like, the pendulum is swinging and it's going to swing one way or the other in a big way.
Yeah, so in this scenario as well, when you look at the rent increases, Perth and Brisbane both are expected to increase somewhere between 8 to 13% over that.
It's kind of exciting. Like, yeah. I'd be so happy with that, plus some growth as well.
Yeah, capital growth plus some cash flow growth there would be really nice. If you look in in Melbourne, you're looking at a +4 to +10% increase in rental returns. Sydney, -2 to +5. So looking pretty strong there as well in terms of rental increases.
You know, so what we're going to talk about now, I suppose, is some of the key findings, but more some of the positives as investors here, because depending on how you're looking at the next few years, like if you care about paper equity, you know, in terms of you've got an identity attached to your wealth position, because last year a property in Sydney was worth $1 million. This year it's worth 900K. So your ego is like, well, I'm worth 100 grand less this year. Then the next few years could either be really nice if Liberal gets in potentially, or really, really damaging to your ego if you're attached to that money that isn't really even yours. You know what I mean? Like, that's a brutal way to look at this, but it is paper money. You can't live off it. It's not income producing unless you sell it in the future.
And it's not easy to just sell a property and liquidate those funds immediately. It takes time to sell a property.
Tax, you know, decision there as well. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. So, you know, I suppose let's talk through some of these positives and negatives associated with, like, Labor getting in, for example. How do you see the positives and how do you see the negatives? And I might just do the same.
So we're in 2 very different situations right now. So for somebody getting started on my investment journey, it's not going to bother me either way. Whoever gets in, if negative gearing gets scrapped, then it's okay for me, because based on this information, it looks like property prices are going to not rise too much over the next few years, but rental return will increase. So that means it gives me another few years to actually acquire a couple of properties, because I'm not going to get fearful of these changes. I'm going to get excited because I know it gives me more time to accumulate the portfolio that I want and get in at extremely affordable prices, but still receive unbelievable rental returns. So the positives for me is being able to accumulate my portfolio much faster than if those prices were increasing, and also not really having to worry too much about the cash flow. That property should be well and truly taking care of itself if I'm purchasing the right assets.
As a first-time investor who you've said you're going to buy your second property by the end of this year, that's your goal, and a third next year. You know, what are you fearful about over the next few years, like in terms of your position? Like, what's the downside to a Labor Party getting in for you?
Nothing. at this point.
Okay.
Like, there's no
Trying to play devil's advocate here so that we can get a balanced opinion, but it's you know, like, you've overcome a lot of the mental blockages that stop you actually getting financially free. So
as you said before, like, you look at the historic performance of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, they've all kicked ass.
Long term.
I've got a long-term approach to property investing, so it doesn't make these changes in the short term affect my strategy.
Yeah.
So I'm not fearful of either way.
Does negative gearing play into your current strategy at all? Like, because I can't even remember having a chat about tax depreciation with your purchase.
Zero. Like, I've never ever developed a strategy around negative gearing or even depreciation. The thing that's gonna, you know, suck a little bit is CGT, but the properties that I'm purchasing, I never plan on selling. I want a few really high quality properties that are going to pay me a significant income. I don't care how much those properties are going to be valued. Well, I do, but at the same time, it's more about the cash flow as opposed to the growth. So in this regard, it just makes that cash flow even stronger, and it allows me to get those properties together sooner rather than later. And I know over the next 10, 15, 20 years, things are going to work their way out as they have in the past.
So what about the positives and negatives of a Liberal government getting in from your perspective? Like, how do you see that unfolding then?
Obviously, the positives is the fact that rents aren't going to increase crazily, so all those people out there that are renting at the moment aren't going to see massive increases in rent, and, you know, people potentially going homeless because they can't afford to rent. Like, that's a huge positive to myself. Also, all those people and even friends of mine that have purchased off the plan units in Sydney or Melbourne, or house and land packages in bad areas that are already in negative equity that could potentially lose even more. So to me, you know, Liberal getting in is going to support those people much better. The negative is, if you look at the data from SQM, they predict property prices to rise quite significantly if Liberals stay in. So it's going to mean that I'm going to pay a little bit more for the properties, which is still fine by me as well, because I want property prices to rise.
Yeah, sure. From my perspective, I suppose the positive of a Labor government getting in as an investor who's a bit further down the journey than Simon is increases in rent are great for me. Like, it increases the amount of passive income that I receive. It reduces my risk significantly. It increases my week-to-week cash flow, which increases my, you know, effectively insurance policy against my future self. You know, when rents rise, generally they don't peel right back unless there's an oversupply. So it means that, you know, rents that haven't moved on properties in Brisbane in 10 years, or Perth for 10 years, or, you know, Sydney for 10 years as well, like, can effectively start rising in a positive way, which I'm stoked about. You know, that does put pressure on people, but it might also be a good thing long term, because people's incomes will have to increase again in response to that. You know, another positive from a Labor perspective for me, which a lot of people wouldn't be thinking of, is, you know, I deeply care about people, like, I deeply care about our clients, but as an investor, I want to be buying when no one else is buying. I want to be buying when there's the maximum amount of damage in the marketplace. And as horrible as that sounds, there is already some of the best buying I've seen in 10 years available right now. And the longer sentiment stays low and people think it's hard to borrow money, and the longer people sit out of the market because they're waiting for the media to tell them it's good again, the more assets I can accumulate. Like, I just look at the last 2 years, like, the accumulation that I've been doing in response to market conditions, because I believe this has been going on for a lot longer than most people recognise. And I think some of the reductions in pricing are just future, like, it's pricing in future conditions as opposed to, you know, the reality of right now. So if money wasn't this hard to access, if we weren't in the mid-cycle slowdown phase, if it wasn't an election year, and if there wasn't this conversation about negative gearing, and the media wasn't hammering property, I don't think conditions are as bad as a lot of people would have us believe right now. Although, I don't want to swear there, but people can be quite silly. Like, the bleed can last longer than it should, just like the boom can last longer than it should. So from a Labor perspective, you know, them getting in, I'm excited about rents increasing, obviously, over the next few years. You know, I'm excited about a rate cut. If they want to reduce my interest rates, I'm happy to take it. You know, I'm excited, I suppose, that it prolongs the buying opportunity that's been available for the last year, and that might last another year if they get on. Like, I thought that this year would be a huge buying opportunity year regardless of who gets in. If Labor gets in, that might extend that for another 6 to 12 months for you and I, which means, you know, we can get another couple of great purchases under our belts at 5, 10, 20% below what market value should be. You know, the negatives of Labor getting in is obviously prices are going to decline in many parts of Australia in the short term, which sucks. Like, one of the key findings is it could take up to 3 years for things to stabilise after this. You know, another negative is that there's a lot of beautiful people that we care about in our lives that own property that, you know, don't think about things the same way that we do, and it can really affect people's mental health when prices start going down. You know, it is also going to have an effect on our business as well, either way. You know, so like there's a whole lot of stuff going on there as well. You know, in terms of the Liberal government getting in, there's only upside from my perspective. Like, it's going to create, according to SQM's research, price gains effectively in every single market in Australia. Even Darwin, they're saying between 0 and 9% growth in the next 3 years. In terms of rental forecasts, rents are also expected to rise basically everywhere outside of Darwin in Australia. And there's obviously variances there, but you know, I like the fact that prices could rise a little bit. I like the fact that rents could rise a bit. You know, if we don't go through this decline now, and what I want everyone to be aware of is that it's just going to set us up for a way, way worse crash down the line. And I'm okay with that personally. Like, I'm okay for property prices in Sydney and Melbourne to drop 20% bottom to top, and for that to bring confidence back into the market. You know, I'm happy that Brisbane sat flat for the last 11 years according to CoreLogic. Like, I'm happy that Perth's declined 25%, that Darwin's declined 35%. Like, there's a natural recorrection going on in Australia now, which had to happen, which is going to bring a lot more confidence into the next stage. And although it's not great for my properties that I own right now, it's not great for our business in terms of just having hundreds of leads coming through the door every month because everyone's just stoked on it and we're in a bull market. I also just think it's, you know, like it's just exciting to me. Like, everything about buying when other people are scared is exciting to me. I love the deal, and when I can get a better deal, and I like, you know, the fact that I can take advantage of current conditions. You know, if things continue as planned, you know, by the end of this year, Sydney will be at minus 20% and Melbourne will be at minus 15 to 20% anyway. You know, that's kind of a nice reset. If Labor wants to come in and do this to the average Australian and cause a further reset from there, then, you know, that might take a little bit longer for the average person to build confidence again. But at some point, from talking to my mortgage broker who's 45 and owns 25 properties outright and has been through this cycle a few times, you know, he sort of said at some point people stop listening to bad news. They also believe that the market is now affordable for them to come back into it and buy it, and this is why it's a real estate cycle. So,
which we're already hearing in people that we talk with from Sydney and Melbourne. They're starting to ask the question if they believe that Sydney or Melbourne represents a good opportunity right now because it has come back.
Yeah, you know, lots of people are asking that on our calls now, like, should I be buying because it's cheap? And I'm like, it's going to be cheap for quite a while. In fact, it could be a lot cheaper, like dirt cheap compared to what it was in 2016 even. You know, it's just I suppose, like, tread with caution. If you're in a great financial position or you're getting started and you've got a long-term approach, you understand what we understand, which is about buying at the right time and the right market and buying quality and getting great cash flow and long-term growth, and not being concerned about short to medium term fluctuations that you can't control anyway, then this is the best buying opportunity in a decade, the next few years. If you know, you don't feel that way, that's completely cool. Just keep stacking your money away, and in a couple of years' time, when things turn for the better, you know, come back into the marketplace and do what you want to do at that time. Like, it's not one or the other. There's just, it's interesting to me, and it's certainly not stopping either of us working towards financial freedom, because you've got to remember those few years that you trade now are a few more years of your life that you've got to work, you've got to pay off debt in the future. It delays financial freedom. And if you're paying 30% more for a property in 5 years' time than I paid for it today, then you've not just cost yourself 5 years of your life, but there's also 30% more debt to pay on that property too. So just be aware of this stuff. Like, we put on our Facebook page a quote from Benjamin Graham, who wrote The Intelligent Investor, and he said, like, I don't know it word for word, I can probably actually bring it up, but it's like, I'm going to bring it up.
There's always going to be pros and cons to any situation. I love that SQM have brought out and had the balls to release this sort of information and take a punt. You know, they've got a lot to lose by putting that information out there, and it's going to be exciting, even though Labor getting in doesn't really change my perspective. I'll still also be voting for Liberal, just as a business person and somebody that wants to see the property market regain some sort of stability.
Yeah, like I really, to be honest with you, now that they've put out this report, and I've just been doing a lot of heavy research into this recently, like, I'm excited either way, because both ways represent incredible opportunities. Like, for our clients, right, that are buying houses and building granny flats on them for $520,000, and they're getting $680 a week rent right now. Like, imagine your rent increases by a further 20% on that, and you're getting $760 or $780 a week rent from something that you can purchase for $520,000. Like, it's just upside if Labor gets in, and the buy price might even slide a little bit. If Liberal gets in, then it looks like within 12 to 18 months we'll be a lot more back to business as usual. We'll move through this mid-cycle, slow down a bit faster, and we'll get on with it. But this Benjamin Graham quote is, even the intelligent investor is likely to need considerable willpower to keep them from following the crowd. You know, this is the biggest test that I've been going through personally, because I truly believe at buying at the bottom, and not just the bottom of the Australian market, because even if Sydney and Melbourne drop by 25%, I still don't see it as value for what I want right now. I'm talking about, like, buying at the bottom of a market, like, and then buying the bottom of that market. Like, does that make sense? Like,
yeah. So
buying Australia at the worst time sentiment-wise in 10 years, then buying Brisbane because it's already been flat for the 10 years before that when other places went up by 80%. You know, like, that takes a certain type of messed up human to be able to like confidently move into the market, because their strategy is so clear. But you can get that clarity on your strategy. Yeah,
we've never been one to follow the crowd.
No.
So it's easy, but I think that's really powerful. And I was listening to a podcast the other day as well, about Jay Shetty, and he was talking about conflict and how human beings just do every single thing that they can do to avoid any sort of conflict. So they won't. It's naturally built into us to go with something that's comfortable and go with what the crowd or what the norm is doing. So when you hear, you know, these people that you're meant to respect online, in the media, on the news, telling you all of these different things, you've got your mum, your grandma, your auntie, your uncle, your sister, your cousin, your best friend, all, you know, bashing property. It's very easy to just follow the crowd and do what they're doing, because that's what's comfortable. It is really difficult to separate yourself from that and really follow the data, follow the information, do your research, have a rock solid strategy to then take advantage of opportunities like this.
I love that, man. Like, I've got to listen to that podcast, because you were telling me about it yesterday, and I was like, people just need to understand that psychologically we're wired as humans based on like 100,000 years of conditioning before internet arrived to just follow influences, to follow our immediate circle, to follow and respond to what's happening in our environment. And right now the environment is saying threat, 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 and you're either standing still, which is what most Aussies are doing, or actually fleeing, which is what most people's natural response would be. And if you can just stand your ground and have the clarity to educate yourself on the last 200 times in history that this exact thing happened, because I was rereading all of Phil Anderson's stuff the other day, and this has been happening in America for 250 years, Australia for 150 years, the UK for 350 years, and I've just been reading up on 400 years of data on the Netherlands, and this cycle has been going on in Holland for 400 years. It's like, if you know that and you have a clear plan in place for exactly where you want to be in the future and where you are right now and your next action step, and you can stomach the fact that, you know, most people are going to think it's a silly idea what you're doing right now, then, you know, this is a once in a decade buying opportunity the next couple of years, and particularly I believe the next 12 months. Most of the blood is coming this year and probably the start of next year, you know. So just really start getting your head around stuff and start understanding your history and start creating a plan that works. Now, the thing that gives me a lot of peace of mind is I don't care about capital growth like I used to. I know that I'm buying metro markets. I know that I'm buying big pieces of land and houses on big pieces of land close to the city and walking distance to the beach. I'm buying the right markets at the right time, but I'm holding them for 15 to 30 years, and that just gives me so much confidence that there'll be ups and downs. But the difference now in my strategy is I'm getting such good cash flow now, and then when I own the properties outright in the future, my cash flow position is going to be even better, that I just have this underlying confidence, which is like, if I can buy something 20% below what it should be worth, and then I can get 2, maybe 3% better rent return than the average puncher in the market, and I've still got cash in the bank and I'm still in a secure income stream, like, there's more risk associated to me now with not doing stuff than doing stuff, and that's really warped. And again, that's just where I'm at after my 10,000 hours of like cutting my teeth in this space. But I'm through there now where I can link strategy to timing to markets to the information that is important, and I'm so clear on the history of this stuff that what happens every now and then is like I get scared the same as everyone else, and then I just go back to my strategy and I go back to my financial position, and as long as I'm safe and as long as I'm improving my position constantly, then, you know, I'm happy to walk through these couple of years that represent like really damaging times or hard times for other investors.
Yeah. And if you're sitting there listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know how to develop that strategy, I don't know how to understand this, and you want a bit of, you want somebody to talk to, then, you know, we do have a buyer's agency. We would love the opportunity to talk with you about your situation and where you would like to be in the future, and maybe help you connect the dots a little bit. Then you can jump across to our website, pumpedonproperty.com, and follow the links to book in a strategy session with either myself, Simon, or Ben to help you get a little bit more clarity around that.
Yeah, so really appreciate everyone's time. If you haven't already done so, please give us a 5-star review on either Spotify or iTunes if you're listening to it.
Only 5 stars.
Only 5 stars. I didn't even think about that.
Listening.
You know, if this isn't for you, then what are you listening to it for? Like, what are you doing? It's like, I'm going to listen to 5 podcasts and then give someone a 1-star review. It's like, why would you spend 5 hours of your life doing that? But, you know, like, I hope you appreciate the way that we come at this, because I'm just trying to like communicate interesting things that we find in our lives. Like, you know, I really just see life as an opportunity, one to be lived, like we were talking about yesterday. Like, just in case you don't get a second crack at this time in your life when you've got earning capacity and you've got health and you've got your family, you know, it's the time to make choices to improve your future so that your future self has even better choices to be made at that time.
For sure.
Like, one of my favourite songs is a Jay-Z song, and he...
I thought I was in the East, bro.
You're West, man. You're talking Perth. And Jay-Z's talking like, you know, like, I don't even know where I'm going with that. I'm just going to end that there.
What song was it?
You know that Forever Young song that he remixed? And he's talking about like just like, I hope the worst days or your best days are your worst days to come.
Yeah,
at the start of the song.
Yeah, at the very start of the song, it's like, I hope the best of todays are your worst of tomorrows. It's like one of my favourite quotes, hey?
It's sick. Like, I truly buy into that. Like, I truly... You know, you've got those mates or family members that for some reason just got stuck in the period of their life and they just stopped growing, they stopped learning, they stopped evolving, and it's kind of like, how sad. Like, you know, yes, there's different stages of your life when you're traveling, when you're single, when you're young, when you're at school, when you don't have any expectations or pressure. But how boring is life if you're not growing and evolving? And I just look at every day as like, honestly, like I just wake up and I'm excited about what we do and what I'm doing and, you know, the future. And I wish that for all of you. Like, I want people's best days to be like their worst days down the line. Like, things shouldn't be hard forever if you've got the right plan in place. And I actually am putting out a video on Facebook in the next week. And one of the lines that I put in there is exactly that. Like, it should just continue to keep getting better. And if you're not financially free now, the only reason is because you're either under 30 and you just haven't had enough time for compound growth to take effect, or you've just got the wrong strategy in place and you're not prioritizing financial freedom in line with some of the other things in your life that you already value. Now,
which blows my mind, because most people spend 40 plus hours a week in a job that they hate, but are unwilling to figure this out and replace that income to live the life that they truly want to be living.
Like, I'm 33. I've got mates that left school at 15 that are 33, so they've been working for 18 years and are week to week still. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, they're some of my best mates. But I'm like, you know, I only started getting into this game at 24, like 2011. I started making some money in 2010. Like, you can completely change your starts with the right strategy in a very short period of time if you're focused. And I'm just, I want people to recognize that over the next few years. Like, there's going to be fear, and there's going to be people that go into hardship because of this, and that sucks for those people. But you don't have to be one of those people. You can use this as, like people use the GFC or the 2000 dot-com boom or the 1990s recession that we had to have, or the 1983 event, to dramatically change your position for your future. So I'll leave it at that. Like, I'm just so excited regardless of what happens. And like always, like the government's kind of like the weather, right? Like,
you never know what you're going to get.
Shit what's happening. Like,
you never know what you're going to get.
Alright guys, well, thank you so much. Please subscribe to this if you haven't already done so. Check us out on YouTube. We do way shorter format stuff. Follow us on Insta, like us on Facey, and we just can't wait for the next few years. You know, we'll see what happens around mid-May with the election, and then we'll know which way we're going and what the strategy's got to be at that point. Cheers, guys.
Thanks.